Tears of Abraham, the title, that's a reference to Abraham Lincoln, yeah?
That's correct.
And why did you settle on that?
Well, Lincoln is my favorite president, hands down. He was willing to shed blood to keep this country together. And I believe that the party of Lincoln is no longer the party of Lincoln. And when we look at the polarization in America now, it would make Lincoln cry right now.
That's what inspired you to write this, to envision this dystopian future where people's worst fears come true. The nation breaks apart again.
That's right. I wrote the book. I started it about 2 years ago, and things were already pretty bad. And we've seen the seething rage across the country to where it's just bursting into the streets now.
Tell us what, what leads to the breaking apart in Tears of Abraham. There's a series of tipping points.
That's right. So the premise of the book is that it's about 10 years out, and Democrats have won again and again. Folks feel like they're not represented adequately by the country, and the final straw is a federal ban on handguns. And so Texas secedes from the Union. Much of the South follows, and there's open fighting on military bases around the country, and civilians are very much caught in the middle.
Were you ever thinking inside, this is something I think could actually happen?
Unfortunately, yes. I used to live in Mandarin, and I would see "Secede Now" bumper stickers from time to time on cars, and it would just make me cringe. And you see on social media folks howling for secession, anti-government people that are armed and very passionate, and I don't think they recognize what secession would mean or what a civil war would actually mean.
When you picked Texas as the state in your story that is the first to secede, I'm assuming that was by design, since Texas is a state that has such a strong identity.
Absolutely, and there was a petition back in 2012 that circulated in Texas that got tremendous traction with that very idea. They were talking about secession, and constitutionally they actually have the right to do that.
What would you say, though, to those who read this, and again, the title is Tears of Abraham, and they think this is entertaining and this is a good story, but come on, there's no chance of this ever really happening again in this country?
Well, I hope that they're right. I wrote it for fun, but I also wrote it as a cautionary tale. And I mean, goodness gracious, we look at the news just over the last 2 weeks with the Trump rallies and the Sanders supporters clashing, and it's really sad. It's terrifying. You see people doing the Sieg Heil salute, and it scares the heck out of me.
Could you, Sean Smith, read this excerpt from your novel?
The national cable networks were reporting that the war was over, that reports of bloodshed were overblown, but reports on the internet and the BBC pointed a very different picture. The United States was convulsing. People streamed across state borders trying to go home, trying to return to whenever they came from, and the routes were the deepest. The highways and state roads were clogged. In many parts of the country, the power grid was down. Curfews were in effect, travel restricted, and interstate commerce was at a standstill. Each state had activated its own National Guard troops, while the larger bases and installations were on lockdown. Some of the bases disintegrated into chaos, like Malmstrom did. The country had fractured into 5 distinct sections, and there were divisions within those areas. The Northeast, down to Washington, D.C., remained loyal to the federal government. The South, from Virginia to Florida and west to Texas, had declared independence under the name the Jefferson Republic. The West Coast had declared allegiance to the federal government from California up to the Northwest. The Midwestern states were trying to stay neutral, restricting federal troop movement, threatening to shoot down all aircraft that violated their airspace. The Western states were leaning towards the Jeffersonians, but thus far had declared neutrality. The state governors seemed to be calling the shots. Most of the United States Congress was dead. Wall Street was closed and the economy was in free fall. The United Nations had offered assistance, as had China, Russia, Australia, and the UK. The President of the United States was at an undisclosed location, calling for peace and unity. The U.S. Navy set up a blockade along the east and west coasts to keep foreign powers at bay. For now, at least, the Navy was staying out of the fighting, spreading around the broken country like wildfire. In large southern cities like Atlanta, racial tensions exploded onto the streets. Minorities clashed with police and National Guard units protesting the secession. Entire city blocks were engulfed in flames, and looting was rampant. One of the network showed images of a gang shooting up a police cruiser, then burning it with a Molotov cocktail, while the officers inside thrashed about and collapsed onto the street, charred. Trash and raw sewage covered city streets in big cities as waste treatment plants shut down. There were water shortages and killings over food. On the outskirts of San Francisco and Washington, D.C., thousands of people suffering from radiation burns camped outside overwhelmed hospitals and FEMA tents.
And that's First Coast author Sean Smith reading from his new novel, Tears of Abraham.